Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast, episode number 141 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week I have 6 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks at home. And that includes World Tree Online, The Duchess of Hammers, Second Drive Begins. That's the second book in that series. I also have Neverfall, Mark of the Hero, Book 1. After that will be Vortena, Everybody Loves Large Chess, Volume 3. Then it'll be a review for Sorcerer's Quest, a LitRPG adventure. After that, it'll be Death Awoken, a Gamelit series, Death God Game Book 1. After that, it'll be Cursemancer, BlackFlame Online, Book number 1. And then a small little note about super sales on Superheroes, Book number 3, but no actual review. But before we go there, we're going to go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with a small story about Dave Wilmarth. He's the author of the Dark Chronicles, and also known for his Mother series. But specifically for the Dark Chronicles, he's actually commissioned a video promotion. It was actually quite interesting. For to give you guys a little look at it. It's actually quite nice. So if you want to go check it out, we'll have a link in the show notes for it. Have nice music, nice graphics, nice moving pictures and stuff.
Mace and Sherry, 2 of the last human survivors of the zombie apocalypse, have found each other. While they hide underground, struggling to survive, they use a virtual reality game to search for other survivors. As they follow quests and fight battles in the fantasy world, they work towards syncing with the game. Food is scarce in the real world, and the zombies are closing in. Their best hope for a long life is to permanently upload their consciousness into the game.
And there, folks. The rest of it is mostly the sound effects and a few other graphical things. But it's a nice. I don't think that's a nice, cute video promotional work for the Dark Chronicles. So good stuff. Thanks, Dave, for taking the time to get that taken care of and made. I think it's really cute. Also in the LitRPG news, we have Dungeon Installation. It came out last week. The Divine Dungeon, book number 4, and I gotta say, it did amazingly well on Amazon. On launch day, it hit the number 15 spot on all of Amazon. It made it number 1 in 7 categories for different genres and subgenres. The novel even temporarily displaced big names like Brandon Sanderson and J.K. Rowling in multiple categories. So just want to give a big shout out and congratulations to Dakota Crowd for really writing such a great book and having such a great launch. Kudos to you and to any. I do this kind of thing mostly because when anyone in our genre does really well, I'm super proud of everyone involved, and I'm super proud of the genre in general, because that means that author has support from everyone in the community and also beyond, because to get that spot means that a lot of people love that particular novel. So definitely go check it out if you haven't already read the series. But congrats to Dakota Crowd and Mountain Dale Press. So, okay, last bit of LitRPG news, we have... For me, yay me, I went to a writers' conference this last week in Las Vegas, which is why this podcast is out a little bit later than normal. I learned a few things about marketing, about analytics, but for me, most of the best part of the entire trip was definitely hanging out and finding other LitRPG authors. I know of a few people were already attending that particular conference. Other people they heard, LitRPG authors are going to be there, so they jumped on the bandwagon, they got tickets, and they got their plans prepared, and they showed up impromptu, and other people just live locally, and they came and hung out with everybody who was there, including some of folks like Matt Ninneman, Tom Hansen, Chris Carney, Dakota Kraut, Rory Stithos, Daniel Schinohofen, and Kevin McLaughlin, and James Baldwin, and more. I'm sure I'm missing people that I've actually had a chance to meet there, but it kind of turned into this impromptu LitRPG meetup in Las Vegas, and I just wanted to thank everybody I met there for being so cool. All the LitRPG authors were absolutely amazing. It was really nice to put some names to faces with books. There were several instances of where I was just standing talking to somebody, and they're the people walk up hey, I know that I know that face. That's Ramon from the LitRPG Podcast. And it's like my face was a beacon for LitRPG authors because people know my face, but they don't always know each other's faces in the community. So it was a nice chance to like have everybody meet. And like I said, everybody was really nice and genuinely. And I'm super proud of our community for having so many amazing, cool, genuinely awesome people in our genre. So I just want to let you folks know about that. It was really fun, and hopefully maybe it's something we can do on a yearly basis at the same kind of writer convention. Who knows? But of course, fans can always show up and we can do bigger things. It's nice to know there are more local people, or at least people who are willing to travel to these kind of things. So it's fun for me. Okay, that's it for LitRPG News, folks. On to stories that are out now. These are stories I haven't read, but they show up on Amazon as LitRPG. They've come out recently, and that includes Hereafter, Dragon Rising. Also out right now is Somnia Online Book Number 3, Fragments by KT Hanna. Robert Bevan has a new short story collection, the 6th short story collection for a series called 6D6. So it has 6 short stories that he released previously, and they're being collected in a kind of little omnibus. So if you're waiting for that particular collection, it's out now, so you can read all the short stories all at once for one good price. Also out is The Goat King's Wives Online by A.D. Chaudhry. There we go. Some new stuff that came out this week that I haven't read, but it is a LitRPG, so there you go. New audiobooks. I think there are more new audiobooks this week than ebooks that I haven't read, I should say, including The Lost City and Epic LitRPG Adventures, a Realm series, book number 2. Read the book, enjoyed it. Haven't had a chance to read the audiobook there or listen to it. Also, as an audiobook is The Long Road to Karn, which is the 5th book in the Realm of Archon series, which oddly enough on the Amazon on the Audible page doesn't say that it's the 5th book in the Archon series. So, but if you've been waiting for it, it's there, it's out, it's waiting for you folks. Also, as an audiobook is The Merchant of Tikba, which is the 4th book in the Bathrobe Knight series, technically, although it is a different main character. So be aware that this is more of a standalone series that runs parallel or parallelish to the regular Bathrobe Knight series. Also out as an audiobook is How to Train Your Kaiju Wars Offline. That is out now as an audiobook, as is The Planet if you search Dungeon Core, which I believe is the 7th book in that particular series. So there are all kinds of great LitRPG audiobooks out for you folks that enjoy them. Okay, on to upcoming LitRPG. This is just a list of stuff that I know it's coming out in the near future. I'm reading it off. There are a few new entries here, including the 10 Realms book number 3, the 3rd Realm. That'll be out on November the 13th, which is only in a couple days. Also out, finally got some cover art and a pre-order up for Apotheosis Boom, the Feedback Loop series, book number 8. That'll be out on November the 14th, 2018. Also new to the list is going to be for a few minutes more, a Book of Corellia, Samson, book number 2. That'll be out on November the 15th. On November the 16th, it'll be Still Soul, Yuvelia, book number 1. On November the 18th, it'll be Guardians of the Round Table, book number 3, Singed Feathers. On November the 19th, it'll be Song of Shadow, The Bards of Barlian, book number 2. November the 20th, Island Kingdoms War, Evolution Online, book number 3. On November 22nd, Fane of Camelin, a LitRPG Adventure Camelin, Realms book number 4. This one is new to the list. On November the 23rd, it'll be Limitless Lands, book number 2, Conquest. So book number 1 seemed to do pretty well with a lot of readers. I didn't quite work for me, but a lot of other people seem to enjoy it. So if you like the series, book number 2 will be out on November the 23rd. Also new to the list, it'll be Civil War, a LitRPG Adventure, The Rogue Dungeon, book number 2, with out on November the 27th. So actually have a pre-order for that up as well from James Hunter and Eden Hudson. On November the 30th, it'll be Eden's Gate, The Omen, which is the 5th book in that series. On December the 10th, it'll be Hero, Level Up, book number 2. On December the 15th, it'll be Redemption, The Rise of Resurgence, book number 3. December the 16th, it is going to be Free Haven Online, book number 3, Winter Dungeonland. On December the 19th, Dungeon Mauling, which is the 3rd book in the Good Guy series. January the 9th, it'll be Level Up Knockout, which is parallel story in the same universe as the other Level Up book, but different main character. So there you go. And that's it. On to new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we're going to begin with our first review, which is going to be World Tree Online, The Duchess of Hammers, Second Dive Begins. Wow, that is a long title. written by M.A. Carlson. It is 483 pages. It is $3.49. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Bye Bye is back. Just a week since the first dive came to an end, Bye Bye and his friends find themselves in Root City, a city built up around the World Tree itself. This sprawling metropolis is filled with potential and danger in equal measure. Barely logged in and just starting to put his plans in place for the month-long dive into the World Tree online, they're quickly entangled in a quest with far-reaching consequences should they fail. Charged with ensuring Duchess of Hammerton survives the next week to make it home. Standing in their way, a love cult bound and determined to kidnap her. If that's not enough, there are those who plot in the dark places hidden just under the surface of Root City. Can Bye Bye and his friends survive the aptly named Duchess of Hammers and the troubles that follow her? Okay, this is actually a pretty good sequel. Actually, it is a good sequel. It captures all the adventure from book one and kicks it up a notch with better pacing. I think that was probably my biggest issue with book one. Not that it wasn't written well or in any way, shape, or form. There were just like story plotting issues and things slow down when they should have picked up when they slow down. And honestly, this one does a much better job of like pacing out like your action scene than having a cooldown scene where you can kind of like chill and relax for a second or you're training and then going back to more action. And like I said, the pacing was just much better in this one. The storytelling in book two is much tighter, and though the plot arcs sometimes get a little twisty as you follow the characters on their many side quests, the paths always leads you back to the main story, which is again an improvement from book one. Some of the story paths in book one just went off in random places and seemed to disappear occasionally. And this one does a much better job of tightening up the storytelling and making every side quest, every little offshoot tangent return to that main plot line much better. So it feels like a much more cohesive story. So kudos to Emmy Carlson for improving that storytelling there. There's good leveling up, there's good skill training in here, good group banter, which is always a plus for the first book, and of course good LitRPG action adventure. So if you have not read the series, I guess you could probably technically jump into this one and you would probably be okay. The author does a pretty good job like reminding you who everybody is. There were a few things in the story that I thought, I'm gonna miss them, like certain characters that change in some ways that I can't say without spoiling things. But I was like, I really liked that particular race choice. And I was like, oh no, okay, okay. But still, I had a good time with it. It was really enjoyable. This does get a better score for book one because, again, it has improved the storyline. It gets a 7.6 out of 10. I had a good time with it. I definitely recommend it. So there we go. On to number 2 review. It is Neverfall, Mark of the Hero, book number 1, a Gamelit RPG series written by C. Wintertide. Okay, this one is 369 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. 4 friends go on a quest to save players trapped in Neverfall Online, a virtual reality MMORPG in this multi-book adventure saga. Luke Stevens' 3 best friends are leaving their hometown for college, but he must stay home to care for his mother, who is dying of cancer. He has accepted his fate, but just as in the video games they love, Luke and his friends are given a real-life quest that changes their lives forever. Dr. Artemage, a secretive man linked with an immersive fantasy role-playing technology, has tracked Luke down and given him a dangerous mission: to rescue the several hundred beta testers who cannot log out of the cyberworld and believe that their in-game lives are real. Luke's companions won't let him go alone. All 4 students are assured that they will be transported to the game world at the highest level so they can easily defeat the Dark Lord and reset the world of Neverfall. But when they enter the game, Luke and his friends all begin at level 1, defenseless, poor, and powerless. The party must level up as their lives depend on it, for it's not just a game. Luke, Cassie, Mac, and Christopher must stay alive because though the world is virtual, the deaths are very real. So there you go. That's actually not a bad novel blurb, very well written. However, it doesn't reflect there are issues with the story, I'll say. There are really some genuinely good hints at a good novel here. As I was reading it, I was like, I could almost peek through it and see, this could be good. But it was instead disappointing and frustrating, and supremely so. And I think part of my frustration with the story is that, like, there are good elements. You can tell the author put some work into some RPG mechanics and some RPG leveling and exploring kind of parts of the story. But ultimately, those things didn't really matter to the story. The best parts of the story for me, and honestly, were the character development moments, especially the relation between the main character and his mom at the beginning. It's mentioned in the blurb that she has cancer, and that relationship dynamic between her and her son, who's just like graduating high school and looking to go to college. That dynamic is very well written. I think it's the best part of the story because there's so many small details that it feels like, oh, that's either something the author experienced by first-hand knowledge or just, I guess, did a ton of research, but still there are like a lot of little tiny points about emotionality for the main character, feeling guilty and hopeful and sad, and like just a bunch of complex thoughts and processes, like, oh, that's somebody who's been through anything, and I've experienced similar things in my own life, so I'm like, that's where I'm connecting with that, I guess. But that's definitely one of the highlights of the story. Unfortunately, beyond the main character and his mom, most of the other characters in the story come off as a little more flat and two-dimensional. Like, nobody else really has depth to their personality. A lot of them are almost characters, and that they have a particular character trait, and that's all. A lot of their characters are really one-note characters, and that's unfortunate. Most of the novel, however, for me, was just plain frustrating. And it's mostly because, again, I can almost see that this could be a good LitRPG story. The premise of the story is one that I read at least a dozen times this year. I think most of those times it's not well done. It's people are trapped in a full immersion game, and if they die in the game, they die in real life. Very Sword Art Online. And in this particular instance, it's like only one person will be able to save them. That's the main character. Why? And this is minorly spoilery. It's because it's suddenly discovered that the main character's dad, who he thought was dead his whole life, is actually the CEO of the game company, who'd only recently discovered him, and he encoded his son's DNA into the game to give him access if things happen to go wrong, I guess. Oh, and the main character's dad, of course, is trapped in the game himself, and he thinks he's his character, a bad guy fantasy version of Darth Vader. Oh, and the only way to save everybody, apparently, is to defeat his father, which for no explained reason ever is supposed to reset the game. Yeah, that one. So it's I consider it's an overly complicated premise, and it's inherently flawed in several respects because one, the fact the main character is named Luke and the dad thinks he's a fantasy version of Darth Vader really makes their interaction super predictable. But that added twist aside, the premise just doesn't work because it only serves to set up the fact that no one in the cast is ever going to die, because if they did, they die in real life. And that's one of the flaws with that particular premise and a lot of liberty stories that use die in the game, die in real life, if only you're trapped there, is that you're essentially setting up a fantasy story because you, in many respects, just you can't kill any characters because they're dead permanently. And that just doesn't resonate necessarily with gamers who are used to like, oh, characters die and they learn from it. It's a learning experience. Death in video games is a learning experience. Like, you're expecting to die. You're not expecting to be such an amazing gamer that you never ever die. And comparing it to the original like Sword Art Online, whose most foundations are pulling from for that trapped in the game, die in real life, die in the game, die in real life storyline. In that game, they never fought characters who were even almost at level. They always had a nice cushion of like 20%. Like, so if he was level 10, he wouldn't find anybody who was like more than level 7 or 8. So that, there's a good cushion, and things went wrong and people did die in that story. And there's other motivational factors for characters to risk their lives. But the majority of people in Sword Art Online didn't risk their lives. And there's a good reason for that, because it's not their natural inclination. And so the people who did were super heroic. And that's just not the case in this story. The main character and his friends fight characters who are well above their level on multiple occasions, and they're not really, it's not the same type of situation. And so that's why I say I've read the storyline, I've read this premise a minimum of a dozen times this year, and it doesn't work because of those kind of characteristics, and it doesn't work here either for those same reasons. Now, game mechanic wise, there are plenty of game mechanics. This is a little bit of story. They're shown throughout the novel with character sheets, with stats, with HP, with mana, even damage notifications. However, again, and this is the disappointing part, they don't really matter to the story ultimately. Like, it basically goes that there's the premise of the story shown, that there's a bunch of RPG leveling, adventuring, etc. Then there's plot advancement, and then there's more RPG leveling, and the RPG parts essentially don't matter to the plot. Like, they really, like, you could at one point, I'll describe it later, but like it's unfortunate that those mechanics, even though they're described throughout the story, ultimately don't really matter. Time and again, the rules, even though they're established, they're broken to stop someone from dying, or just because to make a fight more exciting. The main character is given gear that power levels essentially for fights he should never win, or in one particularly bad example, the main character just seems to fire off an endless stream of fireball spells when the reader was just shown that he should only be able to fire 3 at most according to the spell cost and mana supply. So that's why it's disappointing, because you can tell that the author actually took the time to figure out these mechanics and write them down and make them semi-balanced, and then he goes and ignores them for whatever reason. And it's usually because, I don't want any characters to die. And often other squishy characters in the story who should die in several places don't, because of conveniently suddenly missing damage notifications, or like a seemingly infinite magic healing supply from the healer. And I'm like if you look at the mechanics as they're describing, again, they're fairly well detailed. It's like none of these things should occur. Like it's super highly improbable that like maybe everybody rolled like a natural 20 like 20 times in a row. I'm like, I don't know. But still, that's how it feels sometimes. Like, you're breaking your own rules so that you can advance the story in a particular direction. I'm like, that means those mechanics don't really matter. You know what I mean? And that's how it feels for most of the mechanics. Ultimately, as the story goes on, the part that made me actively dislike it, and it's like not, is that the game stuff was written and it just doesn't matter to the actual plot line of the story. It's all basically filler. The main character serves matrix-like powers that allow him to create spells, portals, and other effects that have no basis in the game mechanics and he hasn't earned. And that's how he solves the conflicts by the end of the story. Also, the only real progress on the main arc of the story, which is like confronting Darth Vader Dad, is accomplished with these sci-fi powers and has nothing to do with the RPG game. You could literally skip from the 35% mark, which is, by the way, when the game stuff starts. That's a really late in the story, to be honest, in my opinion. But you could skip from the 35% mark to the point where he confronts his Darth Vader dad, and the story would be the same. Like, you could skip most of the game stuff, and the actual resolution of the plot in the story would basically be the same, which means that the adventuring stuff before that, the adventuring stuff after that, is kind of just filler. And again, it's not badly necessarily written, but it doesn't really matter to the story, which is why, again, it was disappointing to me. Overall, while I, again, really like the character development of several characters, the rest of the story was just frustrating, and the game stuff didn't matter, which is why I ended up actively disliking this story, and it gets a score of 4 out of 10 for me. That's Neverfall, Mark of the Hero, book number 1, Gamelit LitRPG series with a score of 4 out of 10. There you go. Okay, on to Vortena. Everybody Loves Duchess, Volume 3, written by Nevan Iliev. And that's going to be 444 pages, $3.99, not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. What happens when one takes a murderous psychopath and forces them to team up with a cowardly tinkerer? Though not a question that Jeremiah ever expected to ponder, he's nevertheless looking forward to seeing what that aforementioned duo will cook up. Success or failure does not matter to Richard, only that the journey be entertaining. Things are far less jovial for one under Tom's care. However, stuck in the monster-infested wilderness, lacking the usual backup, hunted by the Empire's top brass and tasked with an incredibly vague and obtuse quest, Boxy will face a world of uncertainty and adversity. However, this is nothing new. Pain, suffering, and loss are things that have been commonplace since day one, and Moxie is not entirely undaunted, but also eager to share those valuable lessons with his new companion. With things both shiny and tasty on the line, the crafty killer has every intention of showing that Lich who's boss. Okay, and just so you're aware, the quick name changes in that novel description are our inside joke in the series. There's a god of probability whose name and physical description changes every time in that story, like from sentence to sentence, because of the randomness and the probability thing. So that's a joke. So don't be confused. Okay, the author gives a content warning saying there's profanity, gore, violence, explicit adult content, and that's all very true. It really is. I'm going to add to that fact that there, in addition to the graphic violence and the graphic sex, there is also rape in this story, and that's going to be a big thing for some people. Not for everybody, obviously, but for some people, that's a real strong line in the sand for them. If there's like graphic rape in the story, it's just not a go for them. So that's why I'm letting you know. And for me, I'm one of those people So sorry. I did read the story though. I read it from cover to cover, and I'm gonna have to drop the series. That's what it comes down to for me. I enjoyed the beginning of this novel. Like honestly, the beginning of this novel was really super enjoyable. It was as good for me as book 1 was, because it was just Boxy, and it was just his gnome tinkerer companion Fizzy, the people you saw at the end of book 2, and it was just the two of them, and their adventures and their action and their RPG progress was very nice. And it was violent. I'm not saying it's not, but compared to book 2, it was also super comparatively wholesome. And that's up until the point until Boxy gets his Warlock class back and he summons his demons and the sex starts back up. And honestly, I kind of lost interest at that point. But what really turned me away from the novel in this series is the fact that rape is added to the story. And that's where it loses me. And it's the rest of the story, a lot of the story is just slice of life adventuring, action adventure, and all that is still really enjoyable for a lot of people. If you look at the reviews on Amazon, the majority, all of them are 4 and 5 stars, and very few of them even mention this particular aspect of the story, which says that a lot of people don't care about it, and the action adventure stuff really overrides any of that other stuff. It's just maybe, and it's I know it's not just me, but a lot of other people, just stopped reading and they didn't finish and then leave a review. But I'm letting you know that the rape is a legitimately big part of this story. Like it. So if you have an issue with that, like I did, just don't read this at all. Now the addressing this particular issue, the author at the back of the novel says that he had the character Fizzy get raped by the main character by Boxy, so that she could become a better character. He says, and this is in quotes, I grew a bit attached and wanted to keep her around, but to do that, she had to undergo some unpleasantness. I'm guessing he doesn't want to spoil what happened. I did my best to make her transition from wimpy tinkerer to heavy metal badass as believable as possible. And this is absolutely true in the story. The rape is an inciting incident for that character's development. But when I look at that part of the story and I see how it advances in the novel, I understand what the author's intent was. But for me, I'm like, there are like a lot of other ways that could have been done. And so and that's just an opinion. I'm not judging the author for doing it. I'm saying, for me, that doesn't work. For me, that isn't justified for me to pay money to read it as content. And that's definitely a personal opinion. There's no judgment on the author or anybody who does enjoy the story despite those particular qualifications or aspects. But for me, it is definitely one of those things like, nope, it's done. Sorry. And even though I read the rest of the story, and that was more part of my job at this point, to continue and to see if just, I don't know, magically it's retcon. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but the rest of the story really does play out the most of the way it did in book 2. There's still graphic sex. The rape's a fucking part of Fizzy's character development, but there's still a lot of action, adventure, and morphing and crafting and murdering, mimics and everything, and all that other stuff is still there, and it's enjoyable for most other people. But for me, as soon as that scene hit and it was enacted by the main character, the protagonist in the story, even though he's a monster, it's like, nope, that's it, done with the series, and nothing else in the story to me, and again, this is definitely personal opinion, justified it being there. So for me, it gets a score of 4 out of 10. I am dropping the series at this point. I'll still let you guys know if when book 4, book 5, whatever comes out, you guys are adults, you can make your own decisions in life, no judgment for me. We all have different tastes and we all have different things that set us off or things that will make us drop a book. No judgment, but for me, this is definitely one of those things, and I've tried to be consistent in that particular aspect. Anytime that comes up in the story, it's usually like, oh no, this is not good for me. So there, gets a score of 4 to 10. That's Vortena. Everybody Loves Large Chest, Volume 3, with the score of 4 out of 10. There you go. Okay, on to our 4th review. It's going to be Sorcerer's Quest, a LitRPG adventure by L.E. Carter. It is 265 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. With the real world in ruins, Arentor is a place of refuge, a virtual world set in fantasy and that anybody can play, but not everybody is equal. Jane has played for years, but by no fault of her own is hamstrung compared to the other players. All she wanted was to not be a burden to her friends. One day, a glitch changes everything, and her newfound power comes with a price. And soon Jane finds that there are plenty of guilds and players that will try to use her for their own gain. Follow again as she navigates and tries to avoid the world of guild politics, and as she quests to the far ends of Aventur to places where the rules of the game can be changed. There we go. Not actually a bad description, and it kind of tells you the inciting incident in the story that makes it interesting and changes the main character's life. I'll be honest, the story has kind of a rough start for me, but I honestly ended up enjoying it, the first part of the story rather, more than I thought I would. Unfortunately, it loses me near the end when it becomes more fantasy than LitRPG. So this is a story with a strong female lead, the main character, and most of the world plays a full immersion virtual reality game because the world is in ruins. She has played for years and never able to do well because she has an issue with her low alignment. And this part's like minor spoiler. They're just not saying the words in the novel description. It's a game mechanic that is frustratingly ill-defined. And in the novel, it's intentionally so. I don't think that it needed to be honest, but it's an intentionally ill-defined game mechanic that kind of serves the purpose of creating a flaw for the main character that's beyond her control. When an update seems to reset her character with a good-looking avatar and a newer class, she becomes in demand. All of a sudden, there's almost this ugly duckling, she's all that kind of storyline here, where she was the ugly girl or the one that we didn't notice, and then suddenly there's a shift. And look, she's literally using her avatar, and she's like pretty for once, and she gets male attention, and she suddenly gets a bunch of help to level or to like increase her class, and it's super challenging. And that's part of the storyline in her emotional development, and that role reversal of like, oh, now you're a new person. What are you going to do with this? How is this going to impact her emotionally, and how is it going to impact her relationships with her existing friends and the guilds in the game, and her suddenly her new classes, her new character class, which is like super in demand, and all the guilds seem to want her. And she has to deal with those developments. And that's really what the story is about. It's about those emotional developments, about that character development for the main character, and about her relationship with other guilds, including like this mean girl type guild. And in that respect, that particular heart of the story was entertaining. I was surprised that I was entertained because I'm not usually into those things, but this was really well written enough that aspect of it was entertaining enough on its own. The game mechanics in the story, though, that's where things get a little looser, I should say. The game mechanics are mostly solidly written. The MMO world that the story takes place in, it has detail. The main character's new class is well balanced, with detriments that balance out her potential power. There are lots of little details about player behaviors, guild tricks, gamer culture that show the author has real experience with MMOs and guild politics. There are a few issues on technical side of the game mechanics where like XP calculations are off for companion leveling. And like I said, the alignment mechanic was super frustratingly vague and contradictory, that I almost put the novel down at one point because of it, but I'm glad I pushed on because, like I said, that aspect is really only frustrating in the beginning when it impacts the main character. Once that shift occurs where like, oh, her sudden class change or sudden appearance change, a new avatar, it's less of it's actually not an issue at all for the rest of the story. So it's one of the things that was just genuinely frustrating when I first read it, because like, this doesn't make game mechanic or math sense. It's really like this made up mechanic where it's like, oh, this is a flaw, the main character can't change on her own, well, what was her kind of thing, which is the setup. I will note that while the story does a good job of detailing the RPG mechanics, it's not the focus of the development arc of the story. The story is, again, mostly about the main character's emotional and personal growth with some minor romance threads. And while there are a lot of X fights and XP grinds, the action is not well described. This is not a good action story. A lot of those fights are summarized. The majority, I would say, to be honest. And there are several like big level jumps in the story without any details. So the game mechanics aren't the focus here. Like I said, if you want to come to the story for like amazing game mechanics and a great action adventure story, this isn't it. This is more, again, focused on emotional character development for the main character, and like and relationship stuff, not just like romantic, but also relationships with other people, relationships with guilds, and how that impacts the main character. There's the highlights of the story in the first part, I should say at least, are definitely character development and like emotional developments for the main character. Also, now this is where it kind of turned for me. At about the 60% mark of the story, in the part 2 of this novel, it kind of takes a real hard right turn into fantasy suddenly. And again, that turn is very much in line with the story, and it's foreshadowed plenty. So it's not like it's not expected, but I was just super surprised at how all the powers, including the ones used to advance the plot, are suddenly super one-wavy. And it's all fantasy magic all of a sudden, and magic, fantasy like descriptions and powers and ways of moving in the plot and resolving things. And it suddenly has more to do with like, feeling the magic and imagination than anything kind of game related. And I was like, that kind of sucks, because it just suddenly honestly just stops being a little RPG for like the last 40% of the story. I'm like, it makes sense within the plot line of the story. Like the author definitely sets it up, so it's like you shouldn't be totally surprised, but at the same time, I wasn't expecting that degree of like, that's a change. And additionally, I had other issues with the last part of the story, in that several story threads from part 1 are completely abandoned. Like there really is like, I know my notes like, this might be a nice story arc. This issue with the mean girl, and suddenly in part 2, it's never mentioned again. It's completely 100% abandoned. And there are several other storylines from part 1 that are just abandoned in part 2, and as are prominent characters from book 1. It's like the author just decided to almost write a different story with like similar characters, and maybe setting in a different world sometimes, including like some of the romantic interest stuff. It's like, that's disappointing, and like, that just lessened my enjoyment of the story some. Overall, this is almost a good story. Like it really is. Like it misses the mark for me in several respects. Again, though the RPG stuff isn't as important as I would personally like it to be, the character development and the plot lines with the guild stuff and the part 1 of this story almost make up for it. There is, though, again, a definite lack of well-described action in the story, and the fantasy journey at the end really just stopped me from enjoying it as much as I could have. However, for you, if you don't care about as much about that stuff as those issues, or you just want a story that's focused less on action and more maybe on character development, you might really enjoy this more than I. But for me, it just kind of misses the mark. It gets a score 6 out of 10. But again, you might enjoy this more than I do if those other issues don't matter to you. But for me, that's Sorcerer's Quest, a LitRPG adventure, with a score of 6 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, next review is going to be Death Awoken, a Gamelit series, Death God System, book number 1, written by Kajak. It is, here we go. 388 pages, $2.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's very, very long description. On a small planet, an unknown presence was stirring. With no physical body, all of its previous memories messed up, and without a clear name, our MC starts his journey. Fused on its, and again, it actually says MC in the novel description, sorry. Fused on its soul, a strange system that will help him be stronger on this strange unknown world. To claim back all that has been stripped away, he must first generate a body. For this, the system reveals that it needs to collect sufficient XP points by absorbing forces, death ores, regaining fundamental skills like talking and weapon wielding to go on dangerous missions. 1 kill equals 1 death point. Name unknown, XP 0, death point 0. The more quests he goes on, and the strong beast and human slew, the more the death core whispers in his ear and torments his soul. The child, still without a name, falls into the company of Demon Yin Yang. He was a raging executioner who tragically lost control when the family he loved were killed. Yin King names him Yi Bai, much the death god's annoyance. This is literally what it says, folks. I'm not missing words. That'll be an issue later. I'll get to it. But no matter the trial or task at hand, the child's thoughts don't stray far from the next kill. Once down hell's pass, it drives his soul to the brink of insanity, and he's not sure he can restrain himself from earning another XP point. I know one thing, death brings me peace. And there you go. I'm not going to read the rest. It's basically, this is a game of adventure, etc. But man, that novel description is both accurate in that that's the plot arc, but also in and the quality of writing. That is a good sample of what you're going to find in the story. There are technical, noticeable writing issues in the story. They're mostly seen at the beginning and the end of the novel for some reason, but they are throughout the novel, including tense mixing, missing or misspelled words being the most common issues. It's overall not a huge issue. It wasn't a big deal for me, but I know it's going to bug some people. And even just me reading that novel description, I'm thinking in my head, oh, I know like 7 guys this is going to bug because of the way it's written. And so if you're one of those people, just skip this. But if you get into that stuff, or your brain just kind of at some point turns it off, you might find something you enjoy. This is an overpowered reincarnation slice of life story with the cultivation power progression system. And that's a lot to unpack. You're going to see a lot of notifications in the story. That's a big part of it. It is LitRPG. But the RPG progression system is cultivation based, which means that it's improving your body and your spirit and your ki through meditation and training, instead of necessarily levels or like XP grind, even though that is here. There is XP gain from like killing monsters, from doing acts, and you can train particular skills. The main character gets a bunch of notifications outlining those skills. But again, it also is very much like of a cultivation theme kind of system. So if you like that kind of stuff, this might really do it for you. It is also very much slice of life though, in that there is no big plot arc of like, I gotta save the world, or we're gonna save the people from the virtual reality world, or anything like that. It's the main character's reincarnated, and he does a bunch of stuff. He goes on these little adventures. But it's really just like him adventuring, him training, him traveling maybe, and doing other things. There are like small goals in the storyline, but that's all they realize. You're really just following him as he does stuff, and that's slice of life. So there you go. And his powers are overpowered a little bit. So that's the OP part. Okay, the story starts off a little bit differently than most, and I actually like the start of this to some degree. Normally in a reincarnation story, it's like, oh, main character dies and he's reincarnated as a baby in this new world, and he may or may not have his old memories back, but he goes on his life completely reincarnated. In this particular instance, instead, the main character is reincarnated as this amorphous blob of energy, and it eventually revealed as like a soul stone or something. And that's like the first 12% in this novel. So you don't even see him as a human until after that point. And it was honestly I like the fact that it was different. I like the fact that it wasn't just the same reincarnation story where he just starts off in the world and, he gets a jump as a fully grown human or anything. He has to kind of figure out the system and progress. And it's interesting to see how the ball version of this character just progresses in this world, and how, and there's definitely a good sense of humor here with like the notifications and the jokes, things there as well, that I thought was cool. It's only after the 12% mark, when the main character gets a body, when it becomes more of a familiar cultivation story with a lighter look at this world and some human characters to interact with. And it honestly became a little more predictable after that 12% mark, when you see he has a regular human body. The main character has some very overpowered skills, and most of the story, again, is from there on in is him traveling, adventuring, training, doing slice of life stuff, no real plot or save the world stuff there, of course. On the game mechanic side, though it's cultivation based, there are a lot of familiar notifications and things that give it like a gamer vibe, or I should say are RPG mechanics. There's an XP system the main character uses to advance his various death-themed powers and cultivate ki and body aspects and all that stuff. There's a whole well-described cultivation ranking system here, and it's well thought out as a progression system. It is very neat and thorough, and if you're into that stuff, you'll probably like this. Overall, while I enjoy the story, this is not perfect, and I'm not saying that it is. I've noted the technical writing issues, and for some people, that's going to be a no-go. It loses a little bit of my enjoyment for those reasons, because every time they pop, it's like, oh, it's like a little speed bump on my reading enjoyment. And it does get a little repetitive in the middle towards the training, about the training a little bit, and it honestly ends on a rather odd note, which I'm not the only person who's reviewed this on Amazon to have noted that. But honestly, if you're in the mood for very specifically a slice of life cultivation story with an overpowered main character, this is something I think you'll enjoy. And honestly, it worked for me enough that I enjoyed the story on the whole. Again, it's not my favorite thing in the universe. It's not, but it's nowhere near bad. And actually, I had a good time reading it, which is the primary purpose of reading, obviously. It gets a score of 7.2 out of 10. That's Death Awoken, a Gamelit series death guide system, book number 1, with a score of 7.2 out of 10. Flawed but enjoyable. There you go. Okay, on to our next review. It's going to be Cursemancer, BlackFlame Online, book number 1, a LitRPG adventure written by 2 people, A.P. Gore and Patricia Jones. Okay, this is 203 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. What would you do if you woke from a magical coma and found out you'd lost 40 years of your memories? Noah woke from a magical coma losing 40 years of his memories. Even his body is not up to coping with this. So his only choice is to live in a VR MMORPG game that would heal his brain and mind and help him recover his memories. He accepts reality and decides to enter the game, but instead of a lush, beautiful human town, Noah is thrown into a cursed demon town. Now every demon wants to kill him. There is no going back or hope of respawn in a human town. His starting location is fixed, and he has to somehow make his way through the nasty demon towns that sprawl between the cursed demon town and the nearest human city. Join Noah on his epic adventure in BlackFlame Online. So there you go. That's the novel description, and it's fairly accurate. Again, just noting, even if you couldn't tell from the way I was reading the novel description, there are technical writing issues here. Nothing too bad, honestly, but the language is super stilted. There's a lot of awkward phrasing and missing words and spelling errors. And it's stuff that may throw you off because it does appear semi-regular. A lot of it's just like, I don't think that's technically incorrect the way that's phrased, but it feels unnatural. It feels very awkward. And that's most of the story. That's most of how the story is written. This is a slice of life chapter game story. There's a huge emphasis on the slice of life elements. It starts out with an odd premise and then kind of devolves in this slice of life story without any real purpose or direction. The main character wakes, he's chained up and he's in prison, and he's told he's been in coma for 40 years and that he went crazy in this magical world, and started flinging magic that killed his fellow researchers. Then he's thrown into a fantasy VR game and told to play until his memories come back. Only something goes wrong, and he ends up on the demon side of the world, and he has to take a new class of Cursemancer, which is the name of the story, where the story title comes from, and side with the demons or feel the pain of death over and over and over again. And the rest of the story is him essentially adventuring, talking to the demon residents, and XP grinding. That's what it is. You're, again, slice of life. You're following a guy in a story on just what he does. Basically, there's not necessarily any real plot. On the game mechanic side, it's not really bad. There are lots of regular notifications that show the MC's RPG progress. His Cursemancer class has some interesting features, like turning an opponent's attack into a curse to be used later. And so on the RPG side, it's not really bad. It's nothing super amazing or notable, but there are some interesting features with the main character's particular class. So that is a thing. However, the really big issues with the story is that it's frankly boring, and the writing style, and a lot of this comes back to the writing style, and that it is awkwardly phrased, and it is really written dryly, in that it was I fell asleep. I fell asleep twice reading this story, and to finish it, I had to make sure I was reading it standing up while I was walking so that I can get through it all. But it was very boring, and that's just the way it is. Maybe for other people, the writing isn't boring, and maybe it's highly entertaining, but for me, it was just the writing style itself, and the descriptions and the character development was so lacking that I really fell asleep twice reading this. The premise, while unique, it doesn't make sense. In a world of magic and technology, why would dropping someone in a VR game restore their memory? Also, why would you make a game with the fantasy magic when the real world has actual magic? That never made sense to me as far as the premise goes. And there's, again, not really a plot, since it's a slice of life story, which is, again, not necessarily bad. I like slice of life stories. But in the case of a slice of life story that's supposed to be engaging and interesting and keep people, coming back for more, there's usually great world building, or there's great action, or there's great character development that gives the reader a reason to stick with the story. I can name you 5 slice of life stories where I love the main character, and I love his power progression, I love the way he does, and I love the action in the story, and that's why I don't mind just following him on these adventures, because it's entertaining enough just to see him go through. It's like watching almost a Dragon Ball Z, or watch it a good anime. Maybe the plot's not amazing, but there are other aspects of those stories, whether they're lovable characters or super amazing action, that make up for it. And that just doesn't happen here. All the characters in this story are pretty flat. The main character has the most personality, but even his personality it's it's inconsistent, and it's everybody else is like, oh, this is, you have like a one note character, and it was super like boring. And I'm never really given a reason to like anybody or care if anybody succeeds, including the main character. Both the game world and the real world, as far as like world development goes, are feeling pretty empty. Like there are hints that the real world combines magic and technology, and yet that's never really developed. And that's an amazing missed story opportunity, because that could have been like an amazing part of this novel. Like, oh, how does this because most of us understand virtual reality and technology in that way, but in this werewolf portion of this world, like there's also legitimate magic and ranks, and people go to school apparently for it, but that's never detailed, and it's only mentioned like almost offhandedly. And the same thing goes for the game world. Like the main character is dropped into this demon portion of the world, but there's never really any lore. There's never any backstory given for these characters of this world, and why is the world divided between like this demon half and this human side, and what's the human side's lore. None of that's ever developed, and so the world often felt like really empty. And I was like, oh, that's again a missed opportunity. The action in the novel, it's okay. It's not like amazing, but it's not like horrible, but it's definitely not enough to carry the story on its own. Overall, again, though there were a couple of good aspects to the story, like some of the game mechanics as they're written and developed interesting enough, I was just mostly bored with it, and that's unfortunate. So for me, it gets a score of 5 out of 10. That's Cursemancer, BlackFlame Online, book number 1, with the score of 5 out of 10. I got bored. There you go. Okay, last little bit. It's not really a review as much as just to mention the Super Sales and Superheroes from William D. Rand. I honestly just couldn't finish the story. I started it and stopped it several times. I got to about the 30% mark, and I was just like, I don't understand what's happening. And I couldn't finish it. I was just so confused all the time about who everybody was, why there were such huge time jumps in the story. There are several other reviews that mention that you're only really going to understand what's happening if you've read all the author's other novels, including the ones that he's written under a different pen name. And for me, I haven't read all the other things. I've read Super Citizens, I've read Otherworld, or Otherlife rather, and I've read a lot of the other authors' stuff, but I haven't read all of it, including I've never read any of the stuff that's written under other pen names. And so when those characters are introduced to the story by this huge like crossover event where like portals start to open, and and characters from other dimensions come in, which are the dimensions the author's written, obviously. It's like, who's this person? Why is he so important? And for people who have read everything, who've read like the 6 or 7 novels author's written for all of his series, it's like, oh, they really seem to love it. Like a lot of the reviews for this novel are all praise. They're really not. Lots of 5, lots of 4-star reviews saying, oh, this was amazing. This was a great story. I love the crossover stuff. But there are also reviews in the novel saying, oh, this is not the same series. This is really confusing. Or even like positive saying, oh, I enjoyed this, but I also read everything. And if you haven't, you're not going to understand anything that happens. And that's what was the case for me, unfortunately. So I'm just letting you know, this isn't necessarily a negative review. It's just that this is an issue for the story. And again, it's not getting a review because I didn't finish it. It's not ethical for me to review a novel that I haven't actually finished. But again, I tried it out and I couldn't finish it. So be aware of that. If you want to enjoy this novel, you might have to read everything else the author has written, which may be a great marketing tool to get you to like look at his other stuff, which is perfectly fine. But for me, I was like, oh, later, I don't understand. I'm legitimately confused at this point. And for me, there were other issues like, oh, the LitRPG stuff doesn't really exist in the portion that I read technically. And it didn't really feel like a Super Cells and Superhero story compared to what book 1 and 2 were for me. So I was like, oh, okay, there you go. So I put it down. I don't know if I'm going to pick it back up ever because again, it was super confusing. It seems like it only gets more so as the story goes on. Other people who I've talked to have read the story and they're like, oh no, I totally get what you mean. I've talked to like 3 or 4 people who have read it. And they're all hoping that it shifts back to a regular Super Cell and Superhero story at some other point in this series in the future. So there you go. That's it. Just want to let you know about it in case you were thinking of picking up, but you hadn't read all the other stuff. It might not work for you. Okay, that's it. We're done. Thanks for listening, for hanging out with me, folks. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, Patreon, or the webpage. If you enjoy the podcast and want to find out all the ways you can support us and make sure that the show stays ad-free and free for people to watch and listen to, you can find out all the ways to support the podcast at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But thank you again for hanging out with me today, ladies and gentlemen. Until we can hang out again, folks, remember to go read some more Lit RPG. Goodbye, everybody.